We'll intervene whenever we decide it's in our national security interest to intervene. And if you don't like it, lump it.
The problem with America is not that we go around marauding around the world imposing ourselves. The problem with America in the last 10, 15 years since the end of the Cold War, really in the last 60 years, is that we've been too slow to get involved.
I don't know how many Iraqi civilians were killed, but I can assure you that the number is the absolute minimal that it's possible in modern warfare.
Every nation in every region now has a decision to make. Either you are with us or you are with the terrorists.
You know, that land over there is yours. You'll go back to it one day because your fight will prevail and you'll have your homes and your mosques back again because your cause is right and God is on your side.
Welcome to the darkened hour.
Welcome to another episode of the Darkened Hour, and I'm your host, Adam Fitzgerald. And with me today is a special guest, Carol Hellermann. Carol Hellermann is a former American Airlines flight attendant for Flight 1 that terrorists were planning to crash into the Sears Tower in Chicago on September 11, 2001. She's speaking out for the first time, and there are likely a dozen more planes in which she says that the FBI or anyone has ever admitted before. Because of employment contract restrictions, Hellermann could not speak out about what took place since retiring from her employment of 21 years. She is now speaking out about her experiences that day. Carol, thank you very much for coming on and talking with me.
Oh, my pleasure.
So with every interview I've ever done, I always tell the audience that I want the guest to basically give a description of who she is and how she came into employment for whatever service that they are employed with. So what made you become a flight attendant at American Airlines?
Well, I didn't become a flight attendant until I was 40 years old, but I had always wanted to be a flight attendant from the time I was 12. I went to Italy with my mother when I was 12 on an Alitalia flight. And my mother told me, I looked at the flight attendant, which was then a stewardess, and I said, I want to do that when I grow up. And it took me a lot of years, but I got there. I also had worked for United Airlines and reservations before I was a flight attendant with American. So it took me quite a few years to get the job that I had. So.
Was it, well, I mean, you waited a long time, and that's
I did.
28 years. Was when you became a flight attendant at age 40, was it everything you've expected it, even when you were at 12?
Yes, I absolutely loved my career. I've met so many interesting people. Flight attendants are like any uniform job. We're family. We get very close to each other, especially when you do international flights, because you're in another country and you're all you have and you're there overnight and, you know, that kind of a thing. I really love to travel. I've always wanted to travel. I enjoy traveling immensely. Different cultures, everything. So yeah, it was pretty much what I thought it would be. That was one of the reasons when 9/11 happened. I had only been flying probably about a year and a half. And I was so angry that it happened because I felt like they would be taking my job that I've always wanted away from me. I almost got furloughed. It got down to my number because the airlines cut back so much on employment. And I just by the skin of my teeth missed being furloughed. And it just angered me so much that they did this. You know, they attacked my airline, my city. I live in New York.
Yeah.
They, you know, everything. And rather than get scared, which a lot of flight attendants actually left, they got frightened. I got angry because I'm just typical New Yorker. I just,
right.
you know, I don't scare easily. How about that?
Me and you both. I'm from Brooklyn, New York. So,
There you go.
you know, let's go back a little bit. When you were, you went through training as a flight attendant. Was one of the requirements in your training regarding how to react to certain situations, such as a traditional hijacking?
Yes.
And what did that pertain to?
Well, basically, we were trained in a flight attendant is trained in so many things. I have basic medical knowledge. I have, you know, customer service, obviously. Also, we do terrorist training, which involved learning about the different types of hijackers that you possibly could have on your plane. They had the religious fanatic. They had the person who wanted fame. They're all different kinds of hijackers, and basically you're told to give them whatever they want so they don't hurt anybody. 9 out of 10, they're going to get what they want, like to go to the political terrorist who wants to go to the country they're from and they hijack the plane. So you basically give them whatever they want so that they don't hurt anybody, is basically what you do. And they also told us about the Stockholm syndrome. We learned about that, which is where your captors basically take one person, they treat them really well. And because you're such under duress, you start like being on their side. It's a whole mindset that. So yeah, we were trained in probably 3 or 4 different types of hijackers. But
Mainly
basically just giving them whatever they want to get you people on the ground safely.
Correct, right. And I have read the FAA's 1999 security manual protocols regarding airline piracy. And it stated in the manual, this is 1999 now, but it stated in the manual that they would rather have a female flight attendant speak with a male hijacker. And this is basically to lessen the tensions, because a male hijacker will see another male as a threat. Is that what they teach?
I wasn't taught that, but that makes perfect sense. I really didn't get that in the training, no, but that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, it basically just says that this will lessen the aggressiveness of the male hijacker and won't see the female flight attendant as a threat to himself. But there was no training about any suicide hijackings, correct?
No, that wasn't that wasn't in the curriculum, no.
So you talked about being very close friends with flight attendants. Is it usually the case that when you fly with the same crew, or is it always a different crew?
Okay, the airlines, basically how you get your trips is every month you bid a schedule. Your schedule is based on how many years you've been flying. It's all seniority based. So typically, when I was American used to have their divisions separated, international and domestic. When I started out, I was domestic, and that was more or less a crapshoot. You could fly with, all different people. But when it was international, it was basically the same people that you flew with all the time because of your seniority and what you could get every month as a trip. I did London for 16 years. So yeah, it was, you get to know them. They're your family. And it's basically the same people.
So here we are. It's September 11th, 2001. Take us right through the top of the day and what you experienced on that day on American Airlines Flight 1.
Okay, that day I experienced what I experienced. Okay, how do I explain this? What I experienced that day, I would learn further information a couple of days down the road as to whether my flight who was on my flight. But let's start on my day. So I go to the airport, I get on the plane. The plane was very light. It was a very light day, very few passengers. We were supposed to leave at 9 a.m. to fly to LA. And I was at the front door. I was what they call the director. Every flight attendant has a position on the plane. I was the director. So it was a dual aisle airplane. It was a 767. So you have to direct people whether to go on the right side or the left side of the airplane. So I'm directing, and all of a sudden the agent comes down. Most of the people are on, and she comes down to the end of the jet bridge, and I'm by the door. So she says to me, "Come here, look." And she pulls me outside. It's about 8:45, and I could see from the jet bridge. I could see the World Trade Center burning. I could see the smoke. And I said, "Wow, what happened?" She goes, some plane hit the World Trade Center. And at this point, we all thought, oh, it was some guy had a heart attack in a little plane, and by accident he hit the tower. I mean, we're not thinking, anything. So I go back on board, and I go in the back of the plane to tell the rest of the crew. And on my way back up to the front, I hear the captain say, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to an air disaster, our flight has been canceled. First thing I want you to do is say a prayer, and the second thing I want you to do is pick up your luggage and leave quietly." So I'm like, oh, wow, I guess our flight's canceled. So what we typically do is we wait after the passengers deplane, and we wait around and see if the schedulers will use us for anything else, or, what's going on. So as I'm standing up front, 3 or 4 Middle Eastern gentlemen come up front, and they start arguing with my purser as to why the flight was canceled. Now, the purser is the lead flight attendant who's in charge of first class and taking care of everything. So they're, like yelling at her, "We got to get there," and they're like very upset. So finally, they left. I'm not thinking anything of it. I mean, people are upset that, the flight, they have to get to a business meeting. What do I know, right? I mean, So all the people leave, and we're on the plane wondering what they're going to do with us. And the agent comes down. I was probably the last person in America to know that it was American Airlines and it was a commercial flight that hit the World Trade Center, because I'm on the plane. And this was basically, there were phones, but it wasn't like today. They were like flip phones, or, it wasn't like you look on it's Facebook and you'll see in like a million things, So we were on the plane. Agent comes down and she goes, they locked down Kennedy. Another plane hit the World Trade Center and one hit the Pentagon. And then we all looked at each other. We knew something was up, but we still didn't know. I still didn't know it was us. I didn't know it was American. So she said, "You have to go to operations in every there's an operations center in every airport for flight attendants that we have a hub in. So basically it's a room with a TV and you can hang out there, and so she says, "You got to go to operations now. They locked down Kennedy." So we all walk out, and all of a sudden I'm in the terminal and I see the American flight attendants running to the terminal screaming, "It's us, it's us." I had no idea at that point. We go up to ops, and basically, we sat in silence, which for flight attendants is rare because we talk a lot. And we just watched the towers fall. Then all of a sudden they said, "They're evacuating Kennedy. Everybody has to leave." So they basically threw us out, put us on the employee bus, and I had to drive home. Like I said, I was very angry. So after the shock wore off, where I couldn't speak, and watching the TV over and over again, because I kept showing it over and over again, I said to my husband, "That's it. I'm getting on the first plane going anywhere." I was mad. I was pissed off. So I called our schedulers basically the next day, and I said, put me on the next flight you have going anywhere. I said, "I don't care. I want to fly." And they said they had a San Francisco flight. And they said, I said, "What position?" Because every flight attendant has a position on the plane. And they said, "What position do you want?" Which was very odd because, I guess nobody wanted to go except me. So that was probably, I want to say it was the second day. So it wasn't 9/11. I think it was the third day after 9/11. Why I thought I was going anywhere is beyond me, because the bridges and the tunnels were locked down. They had sealed off New York. You couldn't get in or out of New York, which is another reason why, if there were only those planes, why would they seal off all different areas in the tri-state area trying to catch more people if it was just those planes that were involved, if you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Why would they bother sealing everything off? Anyway, so I go to the airport. I'm walking through the terminal, and there were 3 flights that were, because I asked in operations what was going out that night. And they said San Francisco, LA, and Miami. Now, if you think about that, those are 3 ports of exit out of the United States, that if they could get out of the tri-state area, they could easily get out of the country by those three ports of exit. So those are the flights that were supposedly going out. So as I'm walking through the terminal, I look over to the left, and there's an LA flight. And there is so much commotion going on over there. I see Port Authority cops. There's all kinds of stuff going on, but I just kept walking to my flight. So I get on my flight, and I'm the most senior at 1.5 years, which is extremely unusual. There were some younger flight attendants that were new hires, and they were basically crying. And I said, "Why did you come? I volunteered for this mission." I said, "How come you're here if you don't want to be?" And they said, "The company told us that if we didn't go, they'd fire us." And when you're a new hire up to 6 months, you don't have union protection until 6 months. You're basically on probation and you have no protection. So here I am with new hires. They've never worked a flight basically before. This is a transcon. This is involved back then. There was a lot very involved with meals and all kinds of stuff. So I'm showing them what to do. All of a sudden, we're being delayed, and the captain comes on and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, due to air traffic, our flight's been delayed." And I look at the flight attendant, I go, "There's nothing up there. What is he talking about?" So then all of a sudden, all the passengers they're on their phones, and they're stopping me now. They're going, we just heard that they found 3 guys with box cutters and knives on the LA flight next to us. And they're like all talking on their phones. So I'm like, until the captain tells us what's going on, everybody just calm down, we'll see what happens. So then another maybe 15 minutes, half an hour goes by, whatever it was. And the captain comes on and he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, our flight's been canceled." And I'm like, oh, great, whatever. So on this flight, there are the original crew and there are deadheaders. Deadheaders are flight attendants that are being rowed back to another place. They'll either use them or say the flight attendants from San Francisco were stuck in New York and wanted to go home. So they'll ride them back home. They won't work it. So we all stayed behind after the passengers left, and we were all talking because obviously it's 2 days after 9/11. Everybody's like, and we're all talking about it. So we finally decide to leave. By this time, everybody's gone. All the passengers are gone through the airport. So we go out, walk up the jet bridge, and we go to leave. We start walking. I don't know who it was. Somebody screams, "Turn around and run, turn around and run." So we start running down the end of the terminal. I look at the captain who's next to me and I go, "What the hell's going on now?" He goes, "That flight, the LA flight?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "We were never going anywhere. This was a sting operation by the FBI. They just took 3 guys connected with the hijacking off of that flight." I said, "What?" He goes, "Yeah, they told us. We knew we weren't going anywhere. They never told the flight attendants." Okay. So this was some sting operation to catch the remaining hijackers in the area, which nobody's ever heard about. So after, they basically, what they did is they blocked off the aisle when they told us to run. The seats at JFK are like they used to be on a row. So they took the row and they're movable and they threw it across the aisle so we couldn't walk past. So after a few minutes later, I see a manager that I knew and about 8 flight attendants who looked like somebody had killed them walk into a little debrief room right near where we were. They have like these little rooms like over the gates. Apparently these were the flight attendants who were working the LA flight. Mm. And they shut the door. And after they did that, then they told us we could leave. As I walked by the gate to the LA gate, I looked up and there was a SWAT team member there with a rifle standing in front of the gate door. And we left. Then when they finally opened up New York to fly, I volunteered again to fly. And what they did is they sent me to San Francisco. I was a deadheader. San Diego. I rode to San Diego, and I was to bring back one of the first transcons from San Diego back to New York. I'm working this flight coming home, and there's a captain. Now, you have to understand there's so many captains, and we don't really see them. Like unless you're up front and you're the purser, who does communication with them, you really don't have much to do with them. So I didn't really know this man, or so I thought. Comes to the back of the plane. He was deadheading. He was riding back to New York. And he starts to tell us a story. And he tells us a story about he was flying Flight 1 to LA the morning of 9/11. And he said the FBI told him that his flight was supposed to hit the Sears Tower in Chicago that morning. And I said, really? I was on that flight. That was my flight. And he said, did the FBI talk to you? And I said, no. He goes, I told them, why are you talking to us? We're in the cockpit. We didn't see the passengers. They wanted to try and get information on the passengers. I told them, why don't you talk to the flight attendants? They have a list of who we are. They could have talked to us. Nobody got in touch with me. He said that the FBI had also told him that there was a target for every major city in the US. They had a target that morning. This is what he told me. And he told me that I was supposed to hit the Sears Tower in Chicago that morning because I was on his flight. So that's how I knew, was from the captain, that this had been, the plan.
So you bring up a lot of interesting questions and a lot of interesting points. And some of these points I've actually reiterated in early podcasts. For example, 3 years ago, I did a podcast on United Airlines Flight 23, which got into national fame because this year, TMZ, of all online publications, actually covered this really important story about what you went through, which was this was a plane that was suspected to be part of the hijackings of September 11, 2001, and it was called the fifth plane. Now, the media covered this on September 11, 2001, but the story died, just like with the claims that there were news reports on September 14th that there was an additional arrest at JFK that you talked about regarding, I think it was over 50 people. There's a co-researcher of mine named DJ Thermodetonator, who is the only person I know besides the infamous and probably the world's most renowned 9/11 scholar and researcher, Paul Thompson. They're the only people that I know of that covered the additional hijacking ring of September 11, 2001. Surprisingly enough, we've been waiting for a very long time, about 20 years, people that worked on these flights that were going to talk about these experiences. And here you are. You're one of now just a couple now just coming out. But it solidifies a point, because what I want to talk to you about is the notion that's raised about these people. And you said it was about 3 or 4 people on that plane?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah, a few of them came up, and who knows how many there are because only a
Hmm.
few of them were talking to the purser. You don't know who, you know what I'm saying?
Sure.
There might
Yeah.
be others, but those were the ones who came up and were talking to the purser as to why it was canceled. Yeah.
So the pilots and the flight attendants of Flight 23, they've come out and they basically said it was four people, three men, one woman, but it was a man because the
Mhm.
flight attendant actually saw hair on her hands and it was a full burqa.
Yeah, I
And then
saw
the
that
cow,
before. Mhm.
yeah, they was dressed as a woman. But there was a national ground stop. Now, for American Airlines, the CEO of operations at the time was Gerald Arpry. And Gerald Arpry was the executive vice president of operations for American Airlines. And he's
Mhm.
actually the first official in the airline industry to order a national stop for American Airlines. And that's why you didn't fly.
You know why he did? Do you know
Was it?
why? It was
Well, that's
because of
because of
the
Flight
flight.
11.
It was because of my brave colleagues who called from the plane that hit the World Trade Center and
Yes.
told Boston operations exactly what was going on
Mhm.
the airplane. That's why. But people don't know that the heroes, that's what gets me. Sorry.
No, it's fine. Look, Betty Ong and the others on that plane
Yeah,
actually did the nation a service
flight
because
attendant. Yep.
this could have been much worse.
Yep.
That some of us who have covered the additional hijacking scheme of September 11, 2001, that we weren't paid attention to. But it is true. Now it's come out that there were additional hijackings that were going to take place. This could have been much worse than what was originally planned.
Right.
Now, just to reiterate, before I press the record button, I was talking with you about this scenario of additional hijackings. Now, going back to 1995, like I told you, there was an operation called Bajinka, and this was originally where the 9/11 operation came from, and this was created by the 1993 World Trade Center bomber Ramzi Youssef and his uncle, which is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's currently in Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, and for being the mastermind of 9/11, where the idea of hijacking planes and crashing them intentionally into targets came from. With the Pachinko plot, there was a hidden plot to that in which they were sleeper cells in the United States. And remember, this is 1995, 6 years prior to 9/11, that they were going to hijack 10 planes. And this is going right back to your story regarding, what the pilot told you, what the FBI told him about there were going to be 10 planes that were going to be hijacked. And they were going to crash all over the intercontinental United States. One of them being the Sears Tower, which we have covered before, being a very primary target at the time. And I think the other targets were the White House, the Golden Gate Bridge, a nuclear facility, and the Capitol. That's right. So, and it was suspected Flight 93 was going to be the Capitol, but we don't know for sure. But nevertheless, the national ground stop by Gerald Arpry, who I consider a hero, an unsung hero at the time, because he got the words from the actual heroes that people have tend to forgotten about, which were the flight attendants of Flight 11. And we couldn't be thankful for it. And yeah, it's a sad thing. And you're very lucky, Carol, that your plane did not fly.
I actually, 4 years later, I think it was 4 years later, I was in London when they blew up the bombs, the buses and the tube stations in London. I was 2 blocks away. And I had to fly home that morning too. That's basically when I lost it. I lost it 4 years later. It took me 4 years to get help because I have PTSD from my encounters. That's basically why a lot of people don't want to talk about it either, because I really didn't want to talk about it, but I think it needs to be said. So.
Well, I think so for sure, because look, like I've said, my colleagues and myself, we have covered the story about additional hijackings, but it's never taken traction. But we want to show the public that it wasn't just 19 fundamentalists. This was a larger operation. And if this was a larger operation, I want to know why the federal government and the FBI basically covered up for it. Now, in your entire career as a flight attendant, You were never contacted by the FBI or the Department of
Nope.
Justice?
Nope. I basically was dissed by my union because after the sting operation, which I didn't get paid for my hours, I'm supposed to get 3-hour call out pay if I don't go anywhere. I called my union and I told him my story. This was my base representative at JFK. And I told him my story. And because I was a new hire, they treat you like you're a piece of garbage. And they told me, I said to him, how come the FBI didn't get in touch with me? And he goes, why? Do you have any information? He was very nasty to me. Okay. And years late, like maybe a couple of years later, when I started talking about the sting operation, because I wanted all my other flight attendant friends to know about it. Anybody I flew with got the sting operation story. And, you know, I wanted them to know what was going on. One time I was telling the story and there was a flight attendant who had been a manager on duty the night of the sting operation. And he went back to being a flight attendant because they, at that time, you could become a manager for a little while if you wanted to, if they liked you or whatever. So I was telling the story and he looks up at me and he shakes his head and goes, that never happened. And he looks at me hard. And I said, are you calling me a liar? He goes, that never happened. He was trying to shut me up. Okay. I don't know what they told him when he was that night, what they threatened him. I have no idea. But he was basically telling me to be quiet about it. So that was kind of discouraging. And because I talk a lot, I was on a flight one time going to LA, and sometimes they need an extra flight attendant. So you work with a different base. I was working with LA flight attendants because it had more passengers than they thought. So they threw me out at the last minute. And I worked with an LA crew from New York to LA. And I was on the plane and I was telling the story about the sting operation. And the flight attendant, this male flight attendant, goes to me, I was on that flight. And I was like, I believe there were no accidents, I swear. And I said to him, oh my God, you were on that flight. What happened? Because I never got the full story of, you know, I just saw the SWAT team guy, told there was, you know, they took them off by my captain. I never got the full story from somebody who was actually on there. Okay. He told me that the commotion I saw when I was walking by the gate with the Port Authority cops, there was a flight attendant who was on the plane and he said he was working. And they said his badge didn't look right. And they were a little suspect of him because they started talking about deadheading and he had no idea what it meant. So one of them kept him talking and the other flight attendant went out and told the gate agent and they got the Port Authority cops and they took him away. That was the first one. Okay. Then he said they were getting ready to leave. They were all, you know, they closed the doors, they back off the gate. He said, and all of a sudden they flung open the front and back door of the airplane and they had, I think he said they had the carts, they took the carts and they rolled them down the aisle and they were screaming with rifles, heads down, heads down. And they took the guys connected with the hijacking. They knew exactly where they were seated and they took them off the plane at gunpoint. This is what he told me. So that's what I found out about the LA flight that, you know, with the sting operation that night. He also told me that none of the flight attendants came back to work. A lot of them were not coming back to work. They were so shaken up by what had happened to them. And that, you know, basically that's it.
Unfortunately, your experiences regarding with the airline industry is similar to that of the flight attendants of Flight 23. And Sandy Dorgan, who's one of the flight attendants of Flight 23, said that even days afterwards, she was told to report to work because they were, you know, low on employees. They wanted she was threatened. She was to talk to the media about her experiences with these men. They're not to talk to the FBI. or what? I mean, she went through a lot. They treat her like,
I
like they
saw
treated
that.
you.
I saw that show. So yeah, I know how they treated her, and yeah, makes you mad.
Yeah, it's unfortunate.
The only
And
reason flight attendants actually, I think, stay in the job is because of each other, because the companies don't treat their flight attendants very well. They
why
treat
is
them
that, by
like
the way? Why do you
children.
think?
I don't know. I think it's because they don't want people to know how important we really are, so they don't have to pay us well enough. I don't know. I don't know what I honestly don't know why they treat us so badly. I don't. They treat us like children with attendance policies and stuff. It's terrible. I mean, that part of it, the company part of it is, and once a year you go back to I would go back to Dallas, which is where our headquarters is. They have a training center there. And once a year, the flight attendants are regulated by the FAA. We have to go back to training once a year to relearn our CPR, to relearn, everything, how to evacuate airplanes all over again, because hopefully, thank God, you never have to use what we're really trained for, which is evacuations and, medical and stuff like that. So you have to train once a year and go back. You get I have to be certified once a year. You have to go back.
Yeah. In the years prior, Carol, in the years prior to 9/11, was there any type of security complaints regarding the airline industry about stricter security measures that you
No,
were aware of?
not that I'm aware of. And they watched us for years. They were platinum executives with American. They were our best customers. They flew us constantly to watch. And I know flight attendants now who, you say, when they think of it, they remember like people standing in the back of the plane, like just watching them, and what they were doing. We used to like go and open up, to feed the pilots. You'd open up the door. You'd stand with the door open, just yakking for like 5 minutes. Nobody really ever thought about it. It was not a big deal until then.
Sure. There's a famous story that happened in the year 2000 about a Delta Airlines flight to Arizona, from Arizona to Washington, D.C. And there was these two Arab men from Saudi Arabia. It was later found out that one guy basically was asked where the bathroom was, and he went to the cockpit and tried to get in. And the flight attendant says, "Oh, no, sir, the bathroom's in the back." And so he goes to the back. And about a couple of minutes later, he tries to enter the cockpit again. And later on, she notices, these guys are acting very strange. They're asking about the oxygen tanks and how they get turned off and stuff like that in the plane. So the plane lands. Meanwhile, they are actually investigated by the FBI, Department of Justice. And it later found out that both of these men were Saudi embassy dignitaries who were going on their way to a Saudi dinner in Washington, D.C. And it was found out that one of the men, Mustafa al-Hakim, actually had a rented car, which was actually driven by an Al-Qaeda affiliate. And later on, the FBI said that this was a dry run about how to hijack a plane and to get familiar with where the cockpit is, where the bathrooms are, how the flight attendants would react. So, yeah, when you talk about these operators that may have been surveying or securing, trying to figure out the security lapses of each airliner and the airline companies. Yes, because the FBI, even in the 9/11 Commission, does state that Mohammed Atta, who is the alleged lead hijacker on Flight 11, actually was in airports like Atlanta, surveying security measures there. And one time even dressed as a pilot and sat on a jump seat in one plane, according to one pilot. So yes, your story does jibe with previous stories.
They also like, we have security around. We're never supposed to tell anybody where we lay over. Okay. Because I believe that they stole pilots' uniforms they had like maids or whatever, I guess, in these hotels. And they stole like pilot uniforms and flight attendant uniforms, from the rooms. So it was, it's supposed to be, you're not supposed to post on social media any place that we stay. You're not supposed to, that's a big no-no. You're not supposed to tell a passenger. A lot of the passengers would go, so where are you staying? And, you're not supposed to tell them. You just don't. That's security. But yeah, I had a week before 9/11, I was doing a Fort Lauderdale flight. Lucky me. That's where they were learning to fly. I had
Florida. Yeah.
two gentlemen sitting across from my jump seat in coach. And they were staring at me, two Middle Eastern gentlemen, I found out into the flight because I thought they were Spanish at first. Two Middle Eastern guys sitting across from me staring at me. Normally when people stare at me, because that's not unusual, I just look at them and I stare back at them, and usually they look away. These two men did not look away, and they looked like they wanted to kill me. And so this is a week before 9/11. So we get up to start the service, and I push the cart and I look at them and I said, can I get you something to drink? And they look at me, and they just look at me. They won't answer me. And they're just looking at me. So I thought they were Spanish. So I said, bebidas, which is drinks for Spanish, right? And the man looks at me and goes, in a Middle Eastern accent, I'm not Spanish. So at this point, this is before 9/11, I'm thinking, what a moron, I'm thinking, so I looked at him, I go, well, would you like something to drink? And he goes, no, which is another of their MO. They won't take anything to eat or drink from you. And this was a week before 9/11 coming from Fort Lauderdale. And they were sitting across from my jump seat because I don't know if you're familiar with what happened. When the flights took off, they made sure that they had men positioned across from the jump seats of the flight attendants, the ones that some jump seats you're by yourself, some jump seats you're across from passengers. And they made sure they had the men sitting there. And when the plane took off and got up, they slit the flight attendants' throats. That was sitting across from them on the jump seat is what they did. That's what Betty Ong and Flight Attendant Sweeney talked about, exactly what they did on the plane. So that's where the box cutters came in. And so they were sitting across from me on that flight from Fort Lauderdale. And one of my friends, flight attendant friends, said that she remembers, she said she'll never forget his face because he was sitting across from her jump seat. It was Mohammed Atta on a smaller plane. I don't remember where she was coming from. And she said he was sitting across from her. And she said, she did the same thing I did. She looked at him and he wouldn't look away. And she thought to herself, that man could really hurt me. That's what she thought, just looking at him. And when the flight got up, she said that he went to the back. It was a Super 80, McDonnell Douglas 80. And those planes, you can stand by the bathroom back there, by the seat out of the way, and you can see the entire aircraft. And he stood in the back, she said, and he watched everything we did. This is what she told me. Yeah. So, yeah, they were watching us.
Carol, why do you think, just to give your own opinion, why do you think the FBI and the FAA wanted this part of 9/11 covered up? Why did they want the notion of additional hijackings covered up?
I think a large part of it had to do with the reason they probably did this to us was our economy, especially crashing into Wall Street. They wanted to kill our economy. And if people got scared and they didn't want to fly, it would kill the economy of the US. As it was, they didn't have flights for a few days, and the cargo and everything else, didn't get delivered. I mean, it really messes everything up, so also there was the plane that blew up over the Rockaways. I say blew up. They want to say it lost its tail or something. That plane blew up. And I think that was also done by the terrorists. And they covered that up tremendously, so that because they were so afraid people wouldn't get on an airplane again to fly.
Right.
Because a few of my friends knew the FO that they tried to blame. They tried to blame him. His father's still fighting it. His name was Sven. And they're still fighting. They tried to blame it on him that he did something with the rudder and they lost the tail or something.
You're talking about American Airlines Flight 587.
Yeah, I am. 587.
Yeah, November 12th, 2001, right.
Right after that. Okay.
Right.
Yeah. So, I think they just were very scared that it would kill the economy, which is what I think they were aiming for, the terrorists. I think they were aiming to kill our economy.
And would this, and well, of course, this would actually paralyze the nation as well.
Right.
I mean, hardly anybody would travel anywhere, even in cars, if this was, a bigger operation where planes would just drop out of the sky like rain.
Right.
This was a worry for the FAA. And, there was a report in late 2002 that was given to the 9/11 Commission and the Joint House Inquiry about the damages that this would cause to the FAA for years. I mean, not even just 2000, for many years to come. But Carol, you basically did the opposite. You actually wanted to fly, to be defiant.
I was angry. I don't get scared. I get mad. I get angry. And that anger lasted for 4 years until London. And that's when it blew up on me, literally, when the buses and the tubes blew up. Because when I landed that flight, and I had actually handled a difficult passenger. We had Tina Louise, you know who she is?
Oh, sure.
Gilligan's Island on my flight and coach, and she was a horror show. Her and her daughter,
my goodness.
And she was really bad. She wanted to be in first and business, and they were full, and she had to sit in coach, and she was screaming at me. She wanted first class chicken, and she was just a nightmare. And her daughter kept going to me, do you know who my mother is? Do you know who my mother is? I wanted to say, yeah, she's some has-been from 50 years ago, but I didn't say that. So anyway, but when we landed the plane, after 9/11, the union had put together a stress management team of flight attendants. If there were ever any other incidents, that they would meet the plane and see if everybody was okay. So when we landed, they called in the back of the airplane and they said, because that's where I was working, and they said they want to know if everybody's okay. Now, I hadn't cried for 4 years or whatever. I think it was 4 years that it happened. And I said, and I just broke down crying and I said, I'm not okay. And my whole crew looked at me and they go, what do you mean you are not okay? And I said, I'm not. I was angry for many years. People who wasn't my personality to be that way. Friends of mine, they'd say to my husband, what's the matter with your wife? I mean, it was just, became who I was. I got very, stern and that's just not who I am as a person.
Right.
And it took me 4 years, and I finally took a month or so off, and I went to get help. I went to a psychologist. And I went and got help. The girl who met the plane asked me if I lived on Long Island, because we're from all over, even though you're based in New York. And she said, I have somebody for you. I used them after 9/11. And she gave me the name of somebody. So, yeah, because I was a mess after that. I cried for 4 days straight. My husband didn't know what to do with me. It was terrible. That's another reason why people won't talk about it. Because it'll just bring it all up again. And they don't want to do that.
And the airline industry has failed to provide psychiatric care for this phenomenon.
I had another incident 5 years later, and it brought up all my post-traumatic stress. And the woman at the EAP, which is supposed to be assistance for anybody having problems, told me that it had nothing to do with 9/11. It was because my mother had cancer. She told me, because I told her what I had been going through. I had an incident where this is where it comes in, where I told you that the flight attendants walked off a flight going to, I think it was San Francisco, I'm not sure. And the flight attendants had noticed the behavior of these Middle Eastern men on the plane, 5 years after 9/11. And the flight attendants walked off and said, we're not taking this plane. And I was sitting standby, which is, if somebody doesn't show up, they give you the duty of the day. You sit for like 6 hours in our operations and wait to be called if they need you, if somebody doesn't show up for the flight, so the flight can go out. So I was sitting standby, and they called me for the San Francisco flight. And I go down to the gate. Well, actually, the manager on duty said to me, you got a flight, go down to the gate. So I said, okay, let me call my husband. I got to give him the flight number. What's the flight number? He goes, no, just go down to the gate. And he's telling me, he goes, you got to go now. And I'm like, oh, all right. So I leave, I go down to the gate, and there's nobody there. So I pull up the flight, I pull up my name and what my next assignment is, and I find the gate. I go over there, there's a gate agent. She goes to me, are you the standby? I said, yeah. She goes, get on the plane now. I'm like, okay. I figured nobody's at the gate. I said, wow, they must be waiting for me to take off, right? So I get on the plane, and there's nobody on the plane. There's cleaners cleaning up the plane and putting new blankets and stuff on. And I'm like, what the hell? So I go back up, and I said to the gate agent, there's nobody on the plane. She goes, yes, there is. The flight attendants are in the back of the plane. Get on the plane. I'm like, okay. So I get on the plane, I go to the back, and there they are. There's some flight attendants. We went out without a full complement of flight attendants because they couldn't get anybody to take this flight, unbeknownst to me when I went down there. They said, how'd they get you? I said, what are you talking about? They said, oh, the flight attendants walked off because they had 4 Middle Eastern men who were acting peculiar, and the flight attendants refused to take this flight. And everybody's been telling everybody else. Everybody was calling everybody else, telling them, don't pick up your phone, don't go to the app, don't go on this flight, because they were trying to get people to cover it. So that's why he didn't want me to talk to anybody else. He didn't want me, he just said, go to the airplane. So I'm like, okay. So what they had done is they had deplaned everybody. I guess they searched them, went through the luggage, whatever. And then they let them all back on the plane. I was on the plane when people started coming on. So I'm thinking to myself, they couldn't remove them because they couldn't find anything, and that would be discrimination and they would be sued. So they had to let them back on the plane. So I'm on the plane, I'm working business, and the man, one of them is in my business class. And the only reason I took the flight was because I had air marshals on my flight.
Right.
So I knew that I wasn't alone on that plane. And I was on reserve, and it was the last day of my reserve assignment, my month to be on reserve. And what they do is they pay you a certain amount of hours per month, even if you don't fly them. And if you walk off or call in sick, then you don't get paid for all the hours you didn't fly. So I needed the money at the time. My husband wasn't working, and I couldn't walk off the plane. And here I am, faced 5 years later. So it brought up my issues, is what I'm saying. It was like the man, I went over, I said, can I get you something to drink? Now he's in business class. And I'm like, can I get you something to drink? No. Can I get you something to eat? No. Opens up the Quran. He's reading the Quran. He goes in the bathroom. Every time this man went into the bathroom, I went into that lavatory after him to make sure. I tossed the whole bathroom to make sure he didn't leave anything in there, like a bomb or whatever. Finally, at the end of the service, I went up front, and because I saw one of the air marshals go up front, and I went up front and I said, okay, what's the deal? He said, they're part of a terrorist cell we're watching. And I said, wonderful. So that brought up my issues again. And I went to the Employees Assistance Program, the EAP, to answer your question with, and she basically knew my history because she'd talked to me after 9/11 and what had happened, and tried to palm it off as it was because my mother had cancer. Yeah. So really, no, they didn't want to take responsibility for any of it.
So, winding down here, Carol, what is now in the future for your plans? You're now retired.
I am.
Your story is beginning to circulate What is the ultimate goal of telling your story? What do you want the people to know?
I actually want to write a book, but the ultimate goal of what I want people to know is that flight attendants are a lot more than what you think they are. And they've been put through a lot, and they should be treated a lot nicer than we've been treated. People were nice for a week after 9/11, and then it got worse. People became horrible again. But my thing is, you should treat those flight attendants with respect because they've been through a lot, most of them. And, you know, they're there for your safety, not to serve you a drink. And people don't get that because the airlines don't want you to get that because they don't want you to be afraid to fly. They want the business. They want you to think that we're just there, you know, as window dressing or whatever. I don't know. They're, you know, but yeah, basically the respect. I want them to be respected more. I wanted to get out the message that those flight attendants saved the country and nobody even talks about them. They get no recognition.
Well, as long as my show is around, they sure will.
Thank you.
Carol Hellermann, American Airlines flight attendant for Flight 1. Thank you very much for coming on and sharing your story and basically reiterating again what we think could have taken place on September 11 was that there were more than just 19 men. There were going to be more planes that were hijacked. And your story is actually very fitting with other people's experiences of what took place that day. And I want to thank you so much for coming on today.
My pleasure. Thank you.